Parents in California are protesting changes to health and sex education guidelines by the State Board of Education. The new framework provides K-12 educators resources on issues including safe sex, sex trafficking, and sexual orientation. According to the board, the changes are just guidelines and students can opt out of certain lessons.
Meanwhile, the Connecticut House passed legislation requiring public school science teachers to include climate change in their curriculum. If signed into law, Connecticut would be the first state to mandate educating students on climate change. Here with her take on the changes being made to public school curriculums is founder and president of For Kids and Country, Rebecca Friedrichs. She's also a former teacher. In 2016, a lawsuit over union fees, Friedrichs v. California Teachers Association, was argued before the U.S. Supreme Court. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for being here. We appreciate it. Let's start with what you think of these curriculum changes. What say you?
Well, the trouble with the changes in the sex education that has started in California is that when you look at it on paper, it sounds all fine and good and like it's an anti-bullying and we're protecting a certain segment of children. But the problem is the way they are implementing it through the curriculum. Some of the lessons are so offensive, I can't even tell you the contents on air because you would be fined for what I would share with you. So I'm just going to give you an example. Teachers like myself.
This is the internet, by the way, so you don't have to worry. But anyway,
but
I mean, you know, Dawn has sensitive ears.
We want to protect it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to tell you then. I'll tell you some highlights. Teachers like myself are told in these curriculums written by Planned Parenthood, by the way, and other organizations, that we are to train children on their sexual rights and how to use all these different types of things to protect them from sexually transmitted infection. And we are told to teach these children to use something called a dental dam. It's a piece of vinyl about this long, and we're told that they are to place it as a shield between their mouth and their partner's vulva, vagina, or anus. We're supposed to tell that to little kids, 5th and 6th graders.
Isn't it good? I mean, I know that we can get into kind of the more salacious details of, you know, some of the things you just described, but isn't it a good thing if this really is like education going, because we know that kids are going to be sexually active at some point in the near future, hopefully not too early, right? But isn't it a good thing if this can ultimately reduce the levels of unwanted pregnancy or even STIs?
Wouldn't that be great? But that is not what's happening at all.
So wait, you're telling me, and I want to hear your empiricism behind this. You're telling me that sex education about practical ways that disease is stopped or stymied does not reduce levels of sexually transmitted infections?
So I started the conversation by telling you that when you look at the information, the law, it all looks great. It looks like it's doing what you just said, but it's the way it's implemented.
So tell me about that specifically. What does that look? You're a veteran teacher, 28 years.
Yep.
What does this look like in terms of its practical effect for the everyday in your classroom?
Well, first of all, I can't find one single solitary teacher in the entire state of California who wants to teach this stuff. We're all terrified. Why? Because once we see the curriculum, we realize it's totally inappropriate for children, completely inappropriate.
Like too graphic, too...
Oh my goodness, yes. And not only that, it's undermining parental authority. For example, we are told, according to the law, that we are supposed to tell children that they have the right to obtain an abortion without parental knowledge or parental permission from age 12. And we as the school are supposed to help them get to the clinic to get that abortion, help them find the money to get the abortion. And you could drop your child off at school. Your child could have an abortion. You could pick your child up after school. You'd have no idea. And there's a lot, I know people who've had abortions, who have lifelong struggles with shame and other issues. And I mean, we're making a lot of decisions without including parents, and that's dangerous.
And I think that that's not a stretch, right? To say that there's a problem with some of the abortion discussions, and that's really life-challenging stuff. That's difficult stuff. But let's talk about sex education in general, writ large. Is this not ultimately a good thing to be able to educate kids about how not to get pregnant, how to engage in safe sexual activity? So what's the obligation of schools at all in general sex ed?
So that's what we've been doing for decades. What you just discussed, the birds and the bees.
Right.
Protecting them, helping them to understand how their bodies work. This is not that. If we left it there, everything would be fine. This is an agenda being pushed in by certain segment and really sadly led by the teachers unions, state and national teachers unions, not teachers, teachers' unions. Like I said, I can't find a teacher who agrees with this stuff. So they're not really just protecting the children or educating them. Let me give you another example. We are now telling preschoolers, we're not allowed to call them boys and girls anymore in California. Students, by the way, boys and girls is a tender thing to teachers. We can't say that anymore. Students, when you were born, your parents did not know your gender. They assigned you a gender. There's really a spectrum of 30, 40, 50 different genders, and you'll figure it out someday. So now we're undermining parental authority. Literally, they tell us to tell the kids, your parents are hung up on gender, but we know better, boys and girls.
We could spend a lot of time just getting into this. It's a very interesting subject matter, but I did want to ask you about public sector, or specifically teachers' unions, and your role in the fights they're in and for and against, and what do we need to know about the status of teachers' unions right now, and how have you been involved in this?
Right, I'm so glad you asked this question. So teachers in general are these amazing, loving, caring, tender people that you would trust teaching your children about the birds and the bees, right? But we have been undermined. We have literally been taken over by teachers' unions. State and national. Most teachers like their local association, their friends standing together. The state and national teachers unions are collecting about $5 billion a year tax-free from teachers, and they're using it to push an agenda, their agenda. And so how did I get involved? Well, I served as a union leader on my executive board of my local, trying to make a difference. And my teacher friends and I all discovered that even as union leaders, we were totally voiceless. We'd go to state level or national level conferences, and when we'd speak out on anything, just questioning, just asking, we don't like the way our money's being spent, or we don't like the way you're representing us, we'd be shot down. I have friends who've been spit on at NEA conventions for daring to question the sex ed, in fact. So I ended up taking a case, myself and 9 other California teachers took a case to the U.S. Supreme Court, Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association. We sued them and the NEA, and our goal was just to end forced unionism in the United States of America. Not end unions like they claimed, end forced
in the
unionism.
closed shop principle, right?
Exactly, exactly. And so our case ended up tied because Justice Scalia died a month after it was heard, but another case came in behind us, Janice, and won on my birthday last year. And so now teachers and all other public employees have the freedom to pay nothing. I also wrote a book called Standing Up to Goliath. And in that book, I articulate the testimonies of 50 different people, mostly teachers, parents and kids, exposing that these unions are actually damaging our schools, undermining parents, degrading the teaching profession, and actually harming little
What
kids.
happened in the aftermath of the decision, by the way, since we have some time?
My decision or the
no,
Janice
the
decision?
successful one, yes.
So it's been almost a year. And so far, if you're a person who has been forced to pay unions and you're, say, like a home health care person, like you're caring for a family member or something, those people are opting out in droves. They're not paying because they
So this has ramifications far beyond just the education sector, right?
Sure, absolutely. It's the any government employee in the entire nation who is in a union. The unions still have monopoly control. They still represent you, even if you don't want it. But you now have the option not to pay.
Right.
And the unions, of course, complain, oh, you know, you're a free rider. But wait a minute, you've been free riding off me for 28 years and I didn't want you. So, and they're the ones who insist on having monopoly control.
Well, all things considered, though, I mean, we sound like we're getting into some larger kind of philosophical stuff about the role of unions and organized labor. Could you argue, I certainly would argue, that ultimately unions have created the universe of worker rights now that we all enjoy? That's because of the labor movement over the last 100 years. Ultimately, have they not created a strong middle class in this country? So are you just completely anti-union here? Like, would you rather see, in your perfect universe, would you rather see a non-unionized workforce across the board?
I'm actually pro-union. So I'm pro-local union, so or association, professional association. I'm pro standing together, and of course, a lot of our government agencies, schools in particular, have become incredibly corrupt, and people feel vulnerable if they have to stand alone. I am pro standing together, an association. I am anti-corruption. And state and national unions, particularly teachers unions and other public sector, I'm talking public sector, I'm not talking private sector. public sector unions have become incredibly corrupt. And what you said about they have done some good things, I couldn't agree more. They are riding on their great past when they did some wonderful things, but they literally have become what they used to fight.
All right, Rebecca Friedrichs, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you. Coming up, Bernie is ringing the warning bells that the media mistakes of 2016 are being repeated.
And the president says that there is a dirtier word than moist. Being mean to your Uber driver might really result in some unintended consequences. Team Rising weighs in next.